Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Reaktor 6 tutorial series. A couple of things for us to have a look at today. We're going to talk about low frequency oscillators, or LFOs. I'm going to design a new sound that uses them, but I also want to embed that sound in a musical project. I've had this project called Ambient Number 1, which has been the test harness in which all of our Reaktor racks have sat so far. But I want to start thinking about these components in a more holistic musical sense. To that extent, what we've got here so far is a couple of bluffs. The bluff that we designed in the last episode, I've added a second one, which is this fella. Same modules, just different settings. And those two bluffs have been panned left and right, so you're hearing this quite nice stereo mix. We've also got the 8-step sequence that we originally designed, and I've just made it a little bit more squareular. If you don't find squareular in a dictionary, that's just because the dictionary is wrong. So we've got this underlying musical context in which we're going to drop any of the sounds that we design. For today, we will design the sound in isolation, and when we get to the end, we'll drop it in and maybe do a little bit of tweaking just to make it sit nicely with the other sounds. If you're enjoying this series so far, check out my Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. You'll be able to download all of these Reaktor presets if you want to just get up and running a little bit more quickly. So for now, I'm going to solo this new rack, which is completely empty, and we'll build a sound from scratch that utilizes LFOs. Okay, this is going to be a new sequence, so I can throw away the note-in block. I don't need that. I'm going to need a new 8-step sequence module, and I'll use the standard bento oscillator. Now this is where we start thinking about musical context. The previous sequence that I created, this 8-step sequence 1, was in the key of C minor. So the notes that I'm going to create for this sequence are also going to be in the key of C minor. I'll patch all of this together. I want a full 8-step sequence. I'm just dialing in the 8th step now. Didn't need to see all of those being input. So we've got an 8-step sequence, which is going to go through the oscillator. Don't forget to turn your clock reset on. If this is living side by side with other modules, other racks, which ultimately it's going to be, you want them all to be running in the same time frame. Okay, so there's our basic sequence. And the moment I press stop, we get the constant output note C because we haven't applied an envelope yet. So let's plug in an ADSR and VCA. And now the output modules are going to go after the VCA with the gate from the sequencer controlling the envelope. So we've seen this a couple of times already in this series, so I've run through that very quickly. But now we've tied this envelope into the sound, so when we get the sequence running again, it's going to stop when I press stop because the envelope has the master control, which is basically VCA's default state is off. It's only when the envelope triggers that the VCA gets turned up. Okay, so now we can start thinking about the tone of this sound. How do we want it to sound at the moment? It's obviously just a very straightforward sine wave. In the boutique folder of blocks primes, you'll find this dual SK filter. SK stands for Salon key. And the most famous emulation, I think, of this, and it's actually referred to in the introduction, a classic semi-modular monophonic synthesizer. They're referring to the Korg MS-20. It's got quite an aggressive sound, this filter. The primary attribute of it is that you've got two different filters in the same module, both a high-pass and low-pass filter, and the signal passes through them in series, so it's going to go through the high-pass filter first, then into the low-pass filter. Let's introduce the filter into the chain by intercepting the VCA output. Now, coming out of the oscillator, I'm actually going to take a sawtooth. Rather than change the shape of the wave, which I could, I'll just take a sawtooth out into the filter, out of the filter, into my VCA, and this thing is now in the chain. Is the high-pass filter, throwing away all the low frequencies. And obviously, low-pass filter doing the opposite. And you can hear both of those filters operating simultaneously. We've also got independent resonance controls for each of them. And this is where the filter can get quite aggressive in the higher resonance ranges. Now, one of the really nice sounds of this module is to pull the low pass filter down and the resonance up. And just before it starts distorting, you get a really nice, almost wah-wah effect. So we're going to try to utilize some of that today. And what I want to do is plug a couple of low frequency oscillators into this filter. The filter sounds very nice all on its own, but I want it to evolve over time. So I'm going to use a couple of low frequency oscillators to do that. A low frequency oscillator is literally just an oscillator. There is nothing dramatic about it at all. The only difference is that it's designed to operate at low frequency ranges. That's literally it. Now my go-to LFO is in the rounds folder because it can be synced. The rounds LFO has the ability to sync to the host tempo, and that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to use two LFOs on this rack, but we'll just deal with the first one. First thing that I need to do is lock it to the host tempo. So just click this button underneath, and now we're in gate mode, and I want 1/16. So you can see that this light's flashing pretty quickly now. This is 16ths at 58 BPM. I don't need an input into this thing. This is effectively a free running LFO, but I do want to sync it to the clock. So whenever the clock resets, I want this LFO to reset as well. I'm going to take an output from the LFO and I'm going to feed it into channel A of my Salon key filter. Okay, I'm going to get the sequence running again. At the moment, modulation port A is having no effect on the sound. And now I'm going to start dialing in some modulation to the low pass filter. So as you can see, it's modulating very quickly. And it almost has the effect of making it sound like a tremolo. What it's actually doing is varying the cutoff rate of the filter. It's got a lovely effect. It's like an auto wah. Now, at too high levels, it becomes a little bit cheesy sci-fi effect kind of based, but at subtle levels, it's quite nice. But now what I want to do is introduce a second LFO, which has a much longer evolving nature to it. So I want a second one of these rounds LFOs. And this time, once again, I'm going to sync it to the host tempo. But this time I want it to operate at 4 beats, which means it's going to take an entire bar to complete one cycle of this LFO. Again, link it to the clock, make sure everything is synced together. This time I'm going to take the output and plug it into port B. So these two modulation inputs are capable of working on the same parameter simultaneously, and I'll do that now. I'll get the sequence running, and I'm going to change the modulation amount on port B, pointing to the low pass filter of the SKF. But this time, I'm going to make my modulation negative. So what that's basically doing is pulling the low pass filter down while port A is very quickly modulating it in 16ths. At the same time as the second LFO is pulling the low pass filter down and making the sound get duller and duller, I want to increase the resonance. You know, earlier when I was talking about the resonance sounds really good when you drive it hard with the low pass filter set low. Let's do that. So now as the LPF comes down, the resonance is going to spike up. I just want to push it to the point where it doesn't quite break. That's pretty much it. It's just getting to the point where the sound's going to fall apart, and then it comes back again off that floor. And after a quick visit from the Cable Color Fairy, we're ready to start integrating this sound into the project. Let's see what it all sounds like together. You have to wait for the reset to come around before everything catches up and syncs up. So now I'm just dialing in these filters to get the sound exactly where I want it to be. I want this first sound to be a bit thinner. Don't have a filter in this sound, so I'm using the pulse width. See, if I pull the low pass filter down too much, this resonance is getting too excited. And mission accomplished. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.